Breaking right now, a judge has issued a ruling on detainments made by Customs and Border Patrol agents in the city of Chicago.
Tensions are running high across the country over immigration raids and National Guard deployments. The courts are now getting involved as residents fight back.
The analyst's hands stopped moving. On the screen, a single photograph. No label, no file description, just a date stamp and an image that needed no caption. Dr. Vanessa Delgado, the Illinois State Medicaid Oversight Director, seated at a private dinner table, laughing, her left hand resting on a document she had just signed. Seated directly across from her, three men already flagged by federal intelligence as senior figures inside the Midwest medical cartel. The FBI's encryption team had cracked the drive at 2:14 a.m. By 2:16, the Joint Task Force director was on the phone. By 2:17, the order was given. We move tonight. This single photograph ended a 19-month investigation. Here is how it started.
This is shocking, Kate. This is a federal judge, Jeffrey Cummings, who says that what ICE and Border Patrol have been doing in Chicago.
6:41 a.m. Chicago, Illinois. The Illinois Department of Health's central office received a routine audit flag, a small reimbursement discrepancy filed by 17 different medical providers across Cook County. On paper, it looked like a clerical error. The kind of thing that gets logged, forgotten, and buried under more urgent matters. Except one analyst at the FBI Chicago field office didn't log it. She pulled it. And what she found underneath that first discrepancy wasn't a paperwork mistake. It was a door. And behind that door, $21.4 million in fraudulent Medicaid billings. A sitting federal judge who had been quietly shielding the network for 4 years, and a state Medicaid oversight director who was not just complicit, she was the architect. 19 months later, 1,100 federal agents, 40 SWAT units, DEA tactical strike teams, and ICE enforcement divisions would converge on Chicago and northern Illinois in what federal command would call the most sophisticated healthcare fraud dismantlement in Midwest history. But the questions nobody could answer at 6:41 that morning were these. How does $4 million vanish through a system specifically built to catch exactly that? What was locked inside the encrypted drives they wouldn't crack for another 19 months? Who inside the state's own oversight structure already knew and chose silence? And why was a sitting federal judge's personal cell number saved inside a Medicaid cartel's private server? Keep watching. Every single one of those answers comes. 4:03 a.m. Chicago, Illinois. 15 FBI breach teams moved simultaneously across the city. No sirens. No lights. Just black vehicles and tactical boots on cold pavement. And the specific kind of silence that only exists when 400 federal agents are moving together in the dark toward the same target. The first location. A glass and steel medical billing tower on North Michigan Avenue. 7 floors, 2 private server rooms, and a penthouse office suite used by Dr. Vanessa Delgado that her state salary could not come close to explaining. Agents hit the elevator override at 4:06. The door to her executive suite was already open, which meant someone had been inside minutes before them. Shredded documents across the floor, laptop wiped, hard drive slots empty. But in the second server room, behind a climate-controlled storage cabinet bolted directly to the concrete floor, agents found 3 encrypted drives the cartel had not reached in time. 8 miles south, at the exact same moment, DEA tactical units breached a warehouse in Cicero, a licensed medical supply distributor that, according to Ayers filings, had processed $4.7 million in equipment sales in a single calendar year. Inside, 6 pallets of ghost-billed surgical supplies that were never delivered to any patient, $2.1 million in structured cash, and a ledger. Not digital. Paper. Handwritten. Badge numbers down the left column. Monthly dollar amounts on the right. 11 names. All of them state health inspectors. All of them had cleared this exact warehouse for 4 consecutive annual reviews without a single citation. By 4:22 a.m., 19 locations had been simultaneously breached across Cook County and DuPage County. First-hour seizures, 43 fraudulent Medicaid billing servers, $2.1 million in physical cash, 18 shell company hard drives, and one handwritten ledger that would become the most important piece of paper in the case. But what was on those 3 encrypted drives pulled from Delgado's penthouse? That is when this investigation became something no one inside Federal Command had prepared for. Stay with me, because the next discovery changes everything. 6 hours later, FBI Cyber Command, Quantico, Virginia. Operation Iron Ledger was live across every screen in the room. Analysts had cracked the first drive by 9:47 a.m. What loaded onto the screen was not simply financial records. It was architecture. The Midwest Medical Cartel hadn't just stolen from the Illinois Medicaid system. They had studied it. Every reimbursement threshold, every automated audit trigger, every inspector rotation cycle, every single gap in the state's claims processing pipeline. They hadn't navigated the system the way a thief navigates an alarm. They had learned it the way a locksmith learns a lock. From the inside. The shell companies numbered 31 in total, all registered as legitimate medical service providers, none of them providing real care to a single real patient. Monthly billing cycles submitted automatically through software that had been licensed directly from the state's own vendor. And the money trail did not stop at offshore accounts. It curved. Through a Chicago restaurant group, through a commercial property LLC operating out of Naperville, through 2 registered nonprofit health foundations that had received state grants 3 consecutive years running. One of those foundations was chaired by a name every analyst in that room recognized immediately. A name that made one senior investigator physically stand up from her chair and step away from her screen without saying a word. She called her supervisor. Her supervisor called the U.S. Attorney's Office directly. Because the chair of that nonprofit, the foundation that had quietly funneled $1.9 million in laundered cartel money into legitimate-looking charitable accounts, was the Honorable Raymond Casillas, a sitting federal judge, Northern District of Illinois. And over the previous 26 months, Judge Casillas had dismissed 4 separate Midwest Medical Cartel-related fraud referrals that had reached his docket. Every one of them gone. But the drive still had one more file. A file the cartel had simply labeled Blueprint. Pause for a second right now and think about what that word means in this context, because the answer lands in 60 seconds. 5:23 a.m. Joint Task Force Command Center, Northern Illinois. The digital operations map on the main wall displayed 47 red markers pulsing across 6 counties. 1,100 federal agents in position. 40 SWAT teams, DIA tactical units, ICE enforcement strike teams, 14 vehicles, all previously seized from cartel-connected entities, now staged to seal egress routes out of Cook County. The coordinated raids that followed moved like a single mechanism. A luxury medical administrative complex in Evanston, used as the cartel's operational nerve center, breached in 4 minutes, cleared 41 arrests. A medical records storage facility in Schaumburg serving as the front for a ghost billing engine processing $800,000 monthly. Seized and shut down in 11 minutes. A residential property in Oak Park housing 6 fraudulent physician identity packages. Credentials stolen from real licensed doctors who had no idea their names were being used to file federal claims. Raided and sealed. A private financial services firm on West Jackson Boulevard, used to process cartel revenue through legitimate-looking healthcare audit contracts. 43 additional arrests. By 7:14 a.m., 96 individuals were in federal custody. Total operation seizures, 31 shell company servers, $4.3 million in physical assets and vehicles, 18 active fraudulent billing systems, and financial documentation requiring 11 separate federal evidence rooms to house. The operation looked complete. The network looked dismantled. Then analysts returned to the blueprint file. And I need you to focus right now, because this is where it stops being a fraud case and starts being something much darker. The blueprint file was not a financial record. It was a 6-year legislative timeline. The Midwest Medical Cartel had not simply exploited the Illinois Medicaid system. Through Dr. Vanessa Delgado's position as State Medicaid Oversight Director, they had quietly rewritten parts of it. 3 separate state regulatory amendments, measures that raised automatic audit thresholds, reduced the required frequency of inspector site visits, and extended claims reimbursement processing windows, had been drafted, at least in part, by Delgado's own office. Each amendment had been moved through the state legislature through political intermediaries with no visible connection to her. Each one made the fraud easier to run. Each one widened the window through which $21.4 million could flow without triggering a single automated detection flag. And Judge Raymond Casillas had held the ceiling. Any case that approached the network, dismissed. Any whistleblower referral that reached his bench, buried under procedural rulings. This was not corruption operating inside the system. This was a parallel system, a deliberately constructed regulatory architecture designed to make the network invisible to the exact agencies responsible for detecting it. The arrests of 23 state health officials, 4 court administrative clerks, and Judge Casillas himself were captured on federal cameras. Badge removals. Handcuffs. People who had sworn to protect public funds being walked out of federal buildings in front of cameras. A deputy state health inspector with 21 years of service stood outside afterward and was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I sat 3 desks away from some of these people for a decade. I had absolutely no idea." That silence carries more weight than any official statement ever could. The federal press briefing made it sound finished. Dr. Vanessa Delgado in custody. Judge Casillas remanded without bail. 96 arrests. $21.4 million in fraudulent Medicaid activity dismantled. The Midwest medical cartel's Chicago infrastructure destroyed. Justice served. The network was gone. Or so they announced. Then the final forensic server returned from Quantico late that same afternoon, and the blueprint file had an appendix that had not been analyzed yet. 9 additional cities, each one carrying the same shell company registration structure, the same legislative insertion strategy, the same Medicaid audit threshold manipulation methodology. 9 cities where this program had not just been planned, it was already operational. Chicago had not been the center of the network. Chicago had been the proof of concept. They had not built a fraud operation. They had built a franchise model. And they had already opened 9 more locations before the first one was ever raided. Outside the federal courthouse that same afternoon, a woman stood in the crowd without a sign or a banner. She was holding a photograph. An elderly man, 71 years old. Her father, a diabetic enrolled in a fraudulent ghost billing clinic that had been filing claims under his Medicaid number for procedures he never received, while the appointments he actually needed kept getting delayed by a system that showed him as already treated. He died in a county hospital waiting room 8 months before the first arrest was made. She did not speak to any reporter. She simply held the photograph up as the vehicle carrying Dr. Vanessa Delgado moved past. That image, a daughter, a photograph, and a $21.4 million number, is the weight sitting inside every case file, every seized server, every encrypted drive in this story. This is not a financial crime story. This is a story about what happens when the people paid to protect the most vulnerable among us decide instead to treat them as inventory. It happened here. The evidence says it is happening elsewhere right now. And the system they corrupted? Parts of it are still operating. If this story found you, tap like so it reaches people who need to see it. Drop expose in the comments if you believe these networks deserve full exposure at every level. Share this with someone who still believes healthcare fraud doesn't have real victims. Because those 9 cities in that appendix, we have identified one of them. It is somewhere you would never expect a Medicaid cartel to establish this kind of operation. Same blueprint, completely different players. And that story drops Friday. Subscribe now or you will miss it when it goes live.
मोट ना करे दर्दी मेरी सुनी तू अज फरियाद अल्लाह दस दीद महबूब प्यार रेदा बर्बाद नू करी तू बेशाद सच्ची ढूंढ वाला माई है खाली पे हक सच तेरा मैं अरशाद अल्लाह होश पाक महबूब प्यार रेदी हैदर शानू पे जिंदाद अल्लाह तुद में मलकल मौत पे जीते जदू तीर दा देर दीदार रब्बा होश पाक दा होवे दीदार हाज़र जदू मौत दी चाड़ से ओ मार रब्बा पाक महबूब दे आज उस दम मैनू कुछ नहीं और दरकार रब्बा हैदर शादा करी में सवाल पूरा दिन रात दी आल पुकार रब्बा से स्वाब की दे महबूब तेरा मैनू और ना किसे दी बेलोड़ साई देवी मैल महबूब दा करा साइया देवी कुटियां बे किस्मतां बे जोड़ साई सुनी अर्ज में